Please put your hands together for Martin Dockery.
Yeah, so disclaimer, I'm not Canadian, all right? But I do have a Canadian girlfriend. So, there you go. Maybe even more so, I've got a Canadian tie, which I think even you guys who were clapping and singing the Canadian anthem, you don't have one of these things, right? And maybe even more so, in 2006, I traveled across Canada exclusively by bus, except for this one small section that I decided to traverse by hitchhiking. The reason being that this hour-long segment would have cost me $17 by a bus, and I'm too cheap, and people tell me that people hitchhike all the time. It's not a big deal. And what's more, this seemed like the safest place in what is the safest country on the planet, right? I was right on the border between BC and Alberta. I was traveling from what people say is the most beautiful place in Canada to what people say is the most beautiful place in Canada. I woke up in the town of Banff, in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, right there in the womb. And I got the tools of the hitchhiking trade, the pen, the piece of cardboard, and I wrote on it, Lake Louise, thank you. And I walked to the edge of Banff, and I'll admit I was a little bit disappointed to see that there was already somebody standing in the most ideal place to catch traffic as they would be going out to Lake Louise. I passed by him. We had a little bit of conversation, but not much, because to look at him was to make me realize, right, we got nothing in common. This guy, he had a black baseball cap on. He had these mirror aviator sunglasses on. He had a gold necklace with a crucifix. He had on a black t-shirt that said, "The Beastie Boys." But we talked a little bit. I said, "Is this indeed the way towards Lake Louise?" He said, "It is." And I walked what I thought was a nice, polite distance away from him, about 200 yards down the road. And I'll admit to feeling a little bit of envy as I watched the car slow down and pick him up. Me trying to give like mental commands to the people who were driving that car that if you only had a little bit more patience and 200 more yards, you would pick up someone that you could talk to and actually see their face and not seeing your own reflected back to you in their mirror aviator sunglasses. But it's amazing how quickly envy can melt away when that car then slowed down in front of me, the window lowered, and that boy with his aviators leaned out and said, "I told him you're going to the same place as me." I got into the back seat, and we set off on our way towards Lake Louise, a sort of interesting trio, the three of us. The driver was in his mid-50s. He was a trial judge from Ontario who only told us that he needed to come here to drive around, to get away to some place where his eyes and his mind could see forever. And next to him, the boy, mid-20s in his aviator sunglasses, who in the summer worked in a retail store in Banff, and who in the winter was a ski instructor, which was the reason he was now going to Lake Louise, to tell the ski mountain there that he would be ready to work when the ski season opened in a month and a half. And then me in the back, telling them that I was here because I wanted to see this beautiful lake that is aquamarine, that looks like paint has been poured straight into it, but because you know it is not paint, you can call it beautiful. And I was telling them how I wanted to hike up one of the small mountains, and the judge, he nodded because he understood that to climb a mountain in Canada is unlike climbing a mountain anywhere else. Because even in the United States, we've got amazing mountains, right? But you get to the top of it, you're going to go down the other side, and you will find people in every single direction. While in Canada, unless you go south, you can walk in any direction and you will merely and simply disappear into the landscape forever. Unlike the United States, which is vast, right? Unlike people in America, we know well the contours of the map of the United States. The map of Canada, it recedes into this hard-to-define northern territory. It freezing into ice and melting the landscape, the border changing every year. It's like shining a flashlight into a cave, imagining looking north towards Canada, right? Because indeed, the country for half the year does disappear into darkness in the winter. You imagine when you walk up a mountain that you're going to be encountering the kind of spirits that have lived here undisturbed since time itself began, that people have not crowded out the natives that used to live and hunt in this area. And you imagine that when you will encounter them, even if you do not believe in them, you will allow your imagination to come up with all kinds of fantastical situations and connections. You will allow yourself to learn something merely from walking alone up a mountain in Canada. But unfortunately, Jeff, with the aviator sunglasses, did not quite appreciate this, because he said to me, "Dude, wait for me while I go in and register for the ski season, and then I'll walk up the mountain with you." And because I so easily feel myself obligated to social contracts that I don't ever remember signing, I didn't say no. I imagine that these ghosts, these people that once walked this land that have died and yet still exist in some realm, are skittish little spirits that would easily be scared off by more than one person walking up a mountain pass, but all the more so when they would see someone dressed like Jeff, not merely to see him dressed, but to hear him, because he has taken out of his bag a huge pair of headphones, and he is listening to constantly only one band, which is, no surprise to look at his t-shirt, the Beastie Boys. Which is to say that when he discovers that I am from New York City, oh my God, he says, "Have you ever heard the album To the Five Boroughs?" I say, "No, I've never listened to that Beastie Boy albums." He is appalled, and he says, "You must listen to it right now." So he takes the headphones off his ears and puts them around his neck, turns his iPod up all the way so that I can hear the Beastie Boys. Now, I imagine it would have been worse if he had actually been carrying a boombox and announcing To the Five Boroughs to, in fact, all of Canada. But at least then, at the very least, I would have actually heard the album To the Five Boroughs, instead of, as it happened, this tinny little sound following me the entire way, as you hear when the headphones are turned up entirely too loud. And every time the Beastie Boys made any sort of reference to New York City, he would be like, dude, come here, come here. And I'd have to lean down close to his clavicle, and then he'd look at me after I heard lyrics I could not hear, and he'd be like, right? And I'd be like, yeah, right. And he was constantly checking in on me, asking if the places that the Beastie Boys talked about in their lyrics actually existed in New York, and I was constantly telling him yes, him having these visions of this far-off place called New York, me trying to appreciate the far-off vistas of this place in Canada. As we walked up, right, he had to drink out of the only bottle of water that we brought, something this size. Him telling me he has never hiked up any mountain before in his life. He begins sweating profusely. He has to take off his Beastie Boys t-shirt, which I can only imagine was an epic emotional struggle before he did so. And I saw then on his back that exactly one half of it was incredibly hairy, and he explained to me sheepishly that he tried to remove all the hair, but that his friend had run out of nair halfway through, and he'd sort of just abandoned the project. I then laughed, made fun of his back. He then laughed as well, and that little moment when you make fun of someone else is the first inkling of an actual friendship. When we hit the top of the mountain, we ran into this woman who was very skittish, looking all around, telling us that we gotta watch out. There are grizzlies up here. She dotted off. Me, though, I was excited, as only a city boy can, who does not appreciate that there are carnivores larger than himself in the area. Excited by the fact that, like, wow, there are creatures killing each other up here. There are things eating each other. There are animals who do not go to met food like myself for their sustenance. There is death and life all percolating right here on top of this mountain. Jeff told me that he fancied himself something of a photographer, though he did not own a camera. So he was constantly pointing out things that I should take pictures of. Me with 35mm print film, which is to say, back then every single picture was precious, and I had to constantly pretend that I was actually taking pictures of things. But one thing I actually did take a picture was of me and then him on this rock outcrop that stuck out into the air there, a big precipice below us. The two of us joking about the crack that ran along the rock, saying that someday in the future this rock will snap off right at that fissure and will tumble down the mountain. The two of us getting off on the fact that we are that close and millions of years away perhaps from death. On the way back down the mountain, he's telling me yet another plan of his for the future. He somehow would like to find out a way to get paid doing bicycle tricks, or what he calls trials. He tells me he's great on the bicycle, that he can ride right along the top of a mountain, that he can go all over these jumps, that he can ride on top of walls and on fence posts, you know, but to look at him is not to quite believe that he's capable of any real athleticism, particularly with the way he is sweating and haggling and breathing. We get a ride all the way back to Banff together, and when we arrive there, finally I'm able to secure the two of us some water. We go get some Chinese food in the food court of a mall that is there, as he tells me he really wants me to meet someone named Crazy Larry. Crazy Larry, he tells me, is the most generous man you'll ever meet, he says. He has taken it upon himself to steer kids clear of alcohol and to pick up garbage. He says he gives away everything, and after a bit of conversation I find out that Crazy Larry in fact had fallen behind on his rent and is now homeless, which would suggest that sometimes it's possible to be too generous, and that maybe his name, Crazy Larry, is not for nothing. Still, this search for Crazy Larry, which never has us finding Crazy Larry, becomes the backbone of our evening, as he brings me to a bar. He doesn't drink alcohol, so I don't either. We play 5 games of pool. Him telling me that what he'd really like to do is become a pool player if he could only figure out a way to earn money for it. He wins all 5 games, though each one, I keep joking with him, is a tiebreaker. We move on from there to an internet cafe, where for whatever reason he feels it's really important to pay some money to get on the internet so he can show me some pictures of this guy who used to live in Banff but who is now out traveling the world, just like you, he says. We work our way finally back to his place where he's staying. We walk into this house and it is so depressingly filthy in there. He's just renting a little back room. It's not his fault, he tells me. The woman who lives here has 3 teenage daughters. There are pictures of them on every single wall, and oh my God, you have never seen more ugly teenage girls in your life. It's amazing. The fathers, and there's a different father for every single one, have long since left, and the 4 of them have now gone on vacation, having to borrow $400 from Jeff himself. We sit down at his computer and he shows me video of himself riding his bicycle, and I'm amazed to see that this guy is in fact incredible at it. He's jumping death-defying leaps over the hills and the gullies and valleys, and it's amazing to see him cheating death at every single turn as he sits back and tells me that when he was 14 he skied straight into a tree. He said he right there died right on the spot, was found without life, was somehow resuscitated. A helicopter had to come in and transport him to a series of locations as they tried to save his life. He says he was put forcibly into a coma. When he awoke, 3 months he had to spend in rehab, learning again how to walk, learning again how to eat. He says he doesn't remember a single part of it, that his memory now is all jumbled. Even today, short-term, long-term, everything flows together into one tense, and he isn't good at speaking or remembering everything. And to hear him say this, to hear him bathe the 2 of us in the computer light, the ghostly glow coming out of that monitor in this dark room, is to believe that perhaps after all, I have indeed met that spirit I hope to meet on the mountain in Canada. Thanks.